Hey, let's rip into this conversation around school lunches. It's one of the big conversations of this week from the School of Health Sciences at the University of New Zealand, it's called now, Chewy. It says Massey University, University of New Zealand. Associate Professor Dr Bevan Erueti joins us. Bevan, good evening to you, sir.
Kia ora, pō manahau ki a korua, ki a tātou katoa. Welcome, everyone. It's good to be here.
Yeah, man, thanks for joining us. We're stoked to have you, because this has been a really interesting conversation this week, and we're sort of, political tragics and sort of political nerds, and we often look at the policy and match it up to what's being said and what's happening, but we don't have the expertise as to, why are school lunches good? We can use research that what we read and then pass it on, but we thought let's get the expert on to throw you the ball and just basically talk to us about school lunches. Open runway. Why is it so good for these kids to be getting school lunches?
Well, so the earlier research indicated that food-related initiatives, particularly those centered on, things like collective engagement, those things contribute to just well-being beyond providing calories and nutrients. They also, food as an item in our culture, it just facilitates social connection and a sense of belonging. That's what we are as Kiwis and as New Zealanders. What we decided to do is that we wanted to look at the differing ways in which this school and lunches, the Kaore Ka Ako program, is being delivered. And as you've pointed out earlier in your social commentary, and that's what I was trying to interrupt with, I've been loving the social commentary that you've been providing on this. Thanks, and giving it the visibility that it has, is that there are two differing delivering systems. 80% of the schools, around about, give or take 5%, using an external source or a third organisation that are providing those lunches. The other 20% are facilitating that delivery of school lunches internally. That is, that they have a commercialised kitchen provided, and that's the unique nature of the school that we went into, that we had a look at. And Dannyburg High School used to be a boarding school. So yes, they've got the facilities. Yes, they had a dining room beforehand, but it was in such a disrepair, kind of in a non-functioning way. It was just a location for the kids to go and hang out.
Yeah.
When they started putting together the Lunch in Schools program, they started getting the funding, they decided that they would become the kitchen again. And so they reinitiated and rebranded that dining hall to be a wharekai. Now, I don't need to tell two learned people like yourselves, and I just saw the clip around Margaret Mutu, and to say what a wharekai is and what it does for a community. But in the marae, the wharekai is the location of where both formal and informal learning occurs. There are things of tikanga and kawa that happen in the marae that are learnt there, but they're not always a part of what's being stated overtly. There's implicit learning that happens inside of that wharekai. We call it tea towel tanga in Te Ao Māori. You grab a tea towel and you do your work, No one's telling you to grab that tea towel, you just do it. And then from that come the stories and the interactions and the engagement to follow what's being taught to you. You follow others in their roles and responsibilities. So I've digressed ever so slightly, but that's how we viewed what Dannyburg was doing. That's why they call it a wharekai, because there are things going on in that room, in that dining hall, that go beyond some of the data grabbing, the quantitative numbers that just can't measure some of this impact. So
can I jump in? Because what I was going to say is it's actually quite an easy concept to get, because how many times do you hear, the kitchen is the heart of our home? That's something that we all already do. And what we've been watching in the commentary from, well, not commentary, but the policy from the legislators, is ignoring the research that points to community wellness and community good. It seems like David Seymour wants to have a tangible, measurable KPI that has a number at the end with a decimal point in it, and it goes from X.0 to X.0, and he can see the improvement. Now, I'm not going to ask you why is he ignoring the research, but he seems to be ignoring the research. And so one of the things, as you've already started, we want to get you on to talk about is actually what does the research say, even though it's less tangible, as you're explaining.
So once again, just listening to you both over the last few nights, thinking about our conversation tonight. What's being missed here is the concepts that we see reflected when we went and visited Dannyburg High School. The idea around specific KPIs and a number around achievement it's a tough correlation to make between, lunch food. I understand food and achievement, food and direct attendance. But there's been a couple of things that have happened more recently, right, that have obstructed this idea around connection, a global pandemic for one. So one of the aspects around the data that we're starting to see is that we're still coming out of that pandemic. So that achievement data needs to be looked at a little bit differently as well. We also know too that there are a lot of variables that play into achievement. Look, if we were to talk about our varied backgrounds, the three of us, we would have three different stories around our own learned education and what that education led to. We would talk about perhaps the impact of people, teachers, and so forth. And so what we wanted to do is to see if we could highlight those things, like that relationship building that is happening when you're around the table. When my family and we take the time to eat around the table. It always stops at 5:30 to 6:30, and we just try to catch up with one another. Sometimes that needs to happen at school, and the reason it needs to happen at school is that what decades of research has shown us, we're talking 20, 30, 40 years of built up research around achievement, is that the teacher-student relationship is one of the most important variables and elements to education and achievement. This wharekai provides another avenue and vehicle for teachers to sit with students. They're not doing the punitive thing like, hey, you owe me a detention, you should be at this location, make sure you've done your homework. They leave that outside the door. And the teachers are talking about, hey, how's your day? Hey, I saw you playing rugby the other day. How's that going? Now, we would hope that stuff would happen anyway, but sometimes it's not because teachers are busy. But this time to sit down, we're seeing a real connection and relationship that's being built around that idea of informal education. Now, there are a couple of other links here too, that perhaps the minister might need to take heed of, and that is that in the curriculum, there are these things called the key competencies. And these key competencies, there are 5, 6 of them that help underpin what we're trying to get young people to learn. They kind of act as a guide towards, I suppose, what we would refer to in the university system as a graduating profile. And so a couple of those key competencies are how to manage self and relating to others. Now, that wharekai does a couple of those things too. For instance, these kids are saying thank you to the cooks, to the chefs, to those in the kitchen. They're clearing the tables. They are wiping down the tables. They are getting drinks for their teachers. They're asking Miss and Mr. and Sir, do they want a drink? There are some things that are going on that actually are linked to the curriculum that we want to learn. Informal learning episodes, like inside the classroom or in the PE lesson or even in education outside the classroom, but they're happening informally at interval and lunchtime, and they're seen as really special moments. There's also a really cool link between the peer and peer, the student-student interaction and engagement. Now, one of the rules is no phones. Now, that's kind of right across all Aotearoa, right? But at Dannyburg High School, the phones go away, and these kids they're sitting there for 30, 40 minutes. They're not just eating and getting out of there and doing something else. They're actually just sitting with their mates, and they're catching up. Mates that might not be in their same classrooms. So what we're getting are a couple of concepts that are probably, I was just listening to our Pou Wahine, our kuia, Margaret Mutu. And the two terms like whanaungatanga, that comes to mind, building relationships. The other one that comes to mind is that tuakana taina, the older and the younger. All year groups are coming together inside of that wharekai. Now, I get it. I understand that we have to have a measurement of some kind. And this is where I've been urging in my discussions, and perhaps it was missed in a couple of clips, but I'm urging the minister to go in and just take a look for himself, to talk with the leadership, to talk with the principal. You saw the principal on the news last night, Di. She's very passionate about this. She talks about how hungry kids are angry kids, hungry kids are unattentive kids. She's seeing a real change because they've got this nutritious type of food, and the food that is utilized is local produce that is brought in from the vendors inside of that community. She's seeing a change in what's going in the classrooms. The teachers are seeing that change. The senior leadership are saying, look, we all know that a full tummy, and by his own words, he said this, that full tummies have better outcomes. So we are just providing a different picture to that, a deeper dive into the experiences. Look, you two know better than me about what it means to draw out experiences and to tell stories. The stories that you both tell and the stories that you get to have on your podcast and in your show, that stories are a powerful way to get across a message. And so that's what we wanted to do, is just to tell that deeper story. So we're getting that whole idea of, maybe there are things that could be or should be taught in the home, but the kids are understanding that if that's what's expected of them at school, then perhaps it could lead to something elsewhere as well. So they're doing all of that kind of mahi, that work themselves. Look, the kids were absolutely awesome. We probably interviewed, I don't know, probably something like 6 focus groups. So we got to around about 25, 30 kids. We spoke to teachers right across, deputy principal. So, that case study approach just allows us to get like I say, a deeper look into what's going on, into some of those, dare I say it, the things that aren't captured by the numbers.
Like, I'm just taken aback by just your description of like this holistic way of looking at it, right? You couldn't have described something more different from my school experience. But I'm just sitting here wondering, a lot of what we see in these neoliberal programs and this very much like balance sheet driven way of looking at these things is there is no cultural aspect to it. Or if there is, it's from a very singular white Western neoliberal nuclear family, everyone's their own little island sort of way of looking at things. And I think this is just, you couldn't ask for a more stark difference. And everything that you said, to me, as someone that has a very different upbringing, schooling, cultural background, that sort of thing, everything you said just goes, yeah, that absolutely makes sense. All of that
makes sense,
tracks.
doesn't it? It makes sense from that perspective, that it's kind of what we've been missing in education. Like as a social constructivist approach in me would say that all learning has a social process. That's the formal stuff, like I keep on saying, the stuff that happens that's driven by learning outcomes and objectives and meeting, standardized test marks and grades and NCA. There's that element to it. But what we're starting to see, or what we can start to see from our engagement with Dannevirke High School, is that there are some other outcomes that once again lead to that idea around social mobility, the idea around being a citizen that would contribute back to society in whatever way those kids choose to lead in their journey and trajectory in their future lives. But we can't take those things for granted, not just by a didactic approach with a teacher saying, do these things. There are some other ways to provide that modelling. And this is what the wharikai does very, very well. You've pointed out something that I should probably talk about and address this idea around what the minister said about the data. We should only compare, or make comparisons between similar social economic status schools and those who are doing the same kind of approach to the delivery. So, for instance, it wouldn't be fair to look at Dannyburg High School and then look at, say, a local school here like Palmerston North Boys High School. It's completely different. It's got different students, and so you are going to get achievement data that is different. And of course, he's going to look at that and go, "Well, they didn't have lunch in schools, and they're doing fine." But the point is that when we want people to at least have the opportunity, where's our actual altruism here? The whole idea around providing a level playing field in terms of allowing kids to at least start off with that idea that they can all eat at school, regardless of what background they have. And that's what I'm afraid that the minister's doing, is he's looking at data that with schools that don't provide lunches, but it has to be like for like and same for same. We want to do that deep dive too. We want to have a look at that as well. And so the Ministry of Education has approached us to give consideration to that. And we want to have a look at that too and tell some more stories about that. We know that there's going to be similarities across the like schools.
I mean, I'm thinking of I guess the closest example I have personally in my upbringing of that sort of community involvement around food, and as close as I can get is the cadet forces. Like when I was an air cadet and that sort of thing, and we would be in a mess hall doing the same thing, and that's what's tweaking my memory there. And it was consuming food together, it was preparing food, cleaning up after each other, all of that sort of thing, and it built community and a shared purpose. And I'm linking that now because, of course, the current government has a real, for lack of a better word, hard on for military style boot camps, because that's what they're thinking of, right? That joining people together as a unit with a joint focus. And all they've got is the boot camp phrase of things, almost the hazing, the breaking down and building back up. They don't look at the community aspects of that sort of environment either. It's just, and everything that they're measuring is on too short of a time scale. Like if you're trying to make any sort of impact into that age group, that the learner's age group, you can't put it in a 3-year bottle and go, that program was a success. You have to follow them all the way through.
You do have to follow them all the way through, and that's another consideration that the minister needs to give thought to. The idea that we're going to see change within a few years is equivalent to saying that we would give teachers a small window to improve achievement. The idea around food, once again, the lunch in schools, ka ora ka ako, is to provide everyone with that same starting point, at least to be able to learn appropriately inside of a classroom. Look, we probably had friends that were going to school with no lunches, right? We probably had friends that would look at our lunch, or I would look at someone's lunch and go, wow, the stigma that I had, that shame I had of even not having lunch or pulling out my lunch and looking at someone else's. We've seen those adverts before on TV. We've seen that. This allows that stigma to be removed. That idea of shame to be removed as well. So those those ideas haven't been considered, and that's what needs to happen over that long term kind of, once again, qualitative, in-depth kind of case study look at the ka ora ka ako.
You brought me to another point there. We're going to hide it in language like targeting and highest need and that sort of thing, because that's great, right? We're cutting costs. We're focusing the money. Who really needs it? And that sounds great, but that also brings more admin and more barriers. And exactly what you remember, like, I really tweaked my memory there of sitting down with my mates in the opening of the lunch boxes and just going, oh, fuck, stink. I wish I had. This lunch looks great. I got, brown bread and cheese. Not great, and when there's no because you can imagine that of like, oh, sorry, only the poor kids get to go and get the free lunch. It's like a backhanded compliment. It would still make you feel shitty.
Yeah.
So
and that's
the idea of the whole school.
The whole school, right. And that was important too. So for instance, Danny Burke High School, once they started the lunch and schools program, they shifted away, they moved away from the tuck shop, right? Ideal, and not ideal, the idea of the tuck shop. So they closed the tuck shop, and what they found is that kids were spending less money. Whānau were happy that they weren't giving their kids so much money to buy this food. As another aspect of that, of what's being kind of seen, an observation by the principal, the teachers, and by the students, is that there's less waste around the school. So I understand, once again, we're talking about one of the schools in the 20% that cook their food on site within a commercialized kitchen. Look, if you wanted to, I think we've shared our YouTube, if not, I can share it. But we did a YouTube 12-minute kind of doco on it. We wanted to do it because we wanted to give it back to the school and say, look, we want to get you out there. But the food looks like cafe-styled food. It's almost like the minister is jealous of getting these kids getting these amazing meals. My point is there is that with this internal kitchen, there has been a change in the environment as well around the school. There's less rubbish. We're seeing additional benefits around attentiveness in class, the focus, all those kinds of things. So I'm being repetitive now, but that's where we really wanted to focus on that whole holistic well-being idea of the school, including its environment.
I'm sorry I ducked out. My internet went down for 3 or 4 minutes, so I had to go. But I was actually listening to you on my phone, so I got most of that as well. And I think it's probably time for us to wrap up and say thanks for being here. I just wanted to say one thing, though, about the tuck shop conversation. If you move away from the tuck shops and you get to more sit-down eating, the problem is what you can't do then is you can't buy the donuts with that powdered sugar on top. And when your friend wants a bite, you hold it like that and then blow the sugar in his face. You know how that was always a fun thing at the tuck shop? No, but in all seriousness, when you were describing Dargaville High, I went to boarding school. So I went to Sacred Heart College in East Auckland, and I never even thought about it, but I thought that experience is actually what I had at boarding school. We'd all sit down and have lunch. We'd have breakfast and dinner as well. And so, yeah, it painted a really interesting picture. And just to say as well, before we wrap up, and I don't want to play politics, meaning we know that when politics side A doesn't want something, they talk out against it, even if it's being hypocritical. But guys like you and guys like the teachers and the principals, who are in this instance the front office or the front line, that the government's being so keen to make sure they know that in all their cutbacks, we're going to listen to the front line. We're not going to touch the front line. They're the most important people. When they want to get rid of something like this to pay for their tax cuts, all of a sudden you guys aren't giving them the right research. So thank you for coming on and giving us some of the research, Bevan. We appreciate that. And yeah, we'll keep talking about it.
Thank you, gentlemen, and to everyone listening. Hey, we'll just have to see what happens in the next month, and hopefully we've done enough to make it visible. Thank you to you both. Appreciate it.
All the best.
Thank you, mate.